So now we're going to start in on our first set of lecture videos. And this one is titled Assessing Democracy, which is exactly what we're going to be doing, assessing the status of democracy in the United States. Along with talking about substantive issues relating to democracy, I'm also going to talk about the exams and ways that I think it's good for you to prepare for the exams. And so I'm going to give you some tips along the way. So we're going to go from talking about substantive material to talking about the exams and back and forth to try and prepare you for what's going to happen in the next set of lecture videos, and then also how to prepare for the exams that are going to be coming up. Each lecture, the beginning of all the lecture videos, I'm going to start with the set of learning objectives, but that will only be the first video. I'll try and tell you what's coming up at the end of each video, but we're not going to make it through all of this lecture in just one video. This is going to be a series of videos around 10 minutes long. But when I start a new topic, I'll always start off with the learning objectives. So let's get started. After this lecture, you'll be able to define and describe the definition of politics. This might seem kind of obvious, but as you'll see, it's a little more complicated than you might have realized. You'll also be able to describe the difference between two types of non-democratic forms of government, a totalitarian form of government and an authoritarian form of government. You'll also be able to explain the significance of popular sovereignty, political liberty, and political equality in maintaining a democratic form of government. The subtext here is that democracies don't maintain themselves. The citizens in a democracy maintain the democracy. And then you'll also be able to assess the status of democracy in the United States. And everybody who's watching this video might have a different assessment of where they think the United States needs improvement, where you think we're doing a good job. That's up to you to decide. You'll also be able to compare and contrast three different perspectives on democracy in the United States: majoritarian democracy, democratic elitism, and pluralist democracy. And then lastly, thinking in terms of the means of production and our definition of politics, you'll be able to describe the difference between three types of systems, economic systems: capitalism, socialism, and communism. So that's by way of the introduction. Now, some important notes. To prepare for these exams, you really need to take thorough notes. And one of the things that you're going to see is that some of the content that's going to be on the Word document that you're looking at right now isn't going to be on the document that's uploaded to Canvas. It's up to you to fill in the details. That's what I'm going to be looking for on your essay questions. Not, did you successfully copy and paste my definition of politics or whatever else it might happen to be. It's, did you take good notes and fill in the details? So again, some of the things that you'll see on this video aren't going to be on what's uploaded to Canvas. My expectation is that you're going to be taking good notes as you're watching the video. And if you get to a point where I'm going too fast, pause me and write out your notes. Okay? The other thing I want to talk about is how I approach teaching these topics all through the semester. And the standard approach I use is I'll give you a definition, I'll elaborate on the definition, and I'll give an example that demonstrates how the concept works. That's what I'm going to be looking for you on the essay questions on the exam. Did you define a term? That's pretty easy to do because I usually just give you the definition. Did you elaborate on the term so that I know that you understand all the parts of it? And then did you provide an example that lets me know that you understand the concept, but not just one word example, why it's an example of the concept? And so we'll talk about that a little bit later, and I'll probably be bringing it up throughout the videos. So let's get started. One last sort of administrative thing. If you notice where it says politics and government, and then in parentheses, it says assessing democracy _1. What that's telling you is that if you decide, I don't remember what Phil said about politics. What you can do is you see assessing democracy _1. If you go onto the Canvas page, you'll see a link in the module on assessing democracy that says videos. All of the videos are going to be listed in there. And so if you want to look back on what did Phil say about politics, you know that if you go to assessing democracy 1, that's where I'll be talking about it. And I'll show you again as we go through this lecture how this works. And it'll make more sense once you're looking at the Canvas page. Now let's get started. I take the science part of political science very seriously. One of the things that fascinates me about this subject and this field is I like the idea of trying to study human behavior, because that's essentially what politics is from a scientific perspective. Not just people getting up and giving their opinions, but is there some way to understand politics using the same kind of methods that other scientists use in the natural sciences? And I'll tell you that when I first started working on my PhD, I was skeptical about whether or not we could study politics from using scientific methods. I'm now convinced that we can, but what it does is it limits the kind of questions we can ask. And so in any scientific endeavor, one of the most important things is that when you're talking about whatever field you're studying, the definitions have to be precise. It can't be that when we're talking about things, everybody has a different definition for the words that we're using. And so in this case, in political science, obviously one of the most important words is politics. What do we mean by politics? Because I'm pretty sure that if I asked each of you who are watching this video right now, if I were to say to you, give me a definition of politics. Oh, my hair's a mess here. Okay, sorry about that little puffy thing there. In any case, if I ask each of you, email me a definition of politics. If there's 30 of you watching this right now, my guess is I would get 30 different definitions. They would vary in terms of their accuracy. They would vary in terms of how cynical they were. They would vary in a lot of very individual and personal ways. And that can't be good if you're trying to study politics from a scientific perspective, because everybody has to be using the same term and it mean the same thing. Now in this class, I get to decide what politics means. It doesn't mean you have to believe my definition is the only definition, and I can assure you it's not the only definition, but it's the one that I'm going to be working with, and it's going to inform everything that I talk about in the coming lectures. And so let me start with my definition of politics. And by the way, I didn't come up with it. A political theorist came up with it, and I'm borrowing it. The definition of politics that I'm using is politics is a struggle over the allocation of benefits and privileges. Politics is a struggle over the allocation of benefits and privileges. Now, I said I'm going to do define, elaborate, example. So let's talk about the elaboration part. I'm assuming everybody knows what a struggle is, right? But just to be sure, does everybody know what an allocation is? When you're talking about allocating something, what does that mean to allocate something? And by the way, you can say it out loud, unless you're sitting at a restaurant or at a Starbucks, and if you talk out loud, people are going to be staring at you. What is an allocation when you allocate something? It means to distribute something. Okay, and then what do I mean by benefits and privileges? It's a little more complicated, but I think you'll get it. In any society, there are things that people want. But in almost any society, the things that people want are in a finite supply. There's not enough for everybody. And so some people are going to get those things and some people aren't. The people who get those things, we generally call them the winners. And the people who don't get those things, they're the losers in this struggle over the allocation of benefits and privileges. And so the struggle over the allocation of benefits and privileges is the struggle over who's going to get the things that that people want that are in finite supply. Who are the winners going to be and who the losers are going to be. Now, having given you the definition and having elaborated on the definition, in the next video, I'm going to start with 2 examples that demonstrate what I mean by politics.